when you look at the metrics for those same mortality risk numbers for VO2, there's a huge difference.
You've said VO2 like 100 times.
Okay.
You said VO2 max once at the beginning, and now you keep saying VO2, VO2, VO2.
Okay.
For sure.
Yeah, but why does it matter?
Oh my God.
I'm not trying to sell VO2 max.
But it's a concept of VO2 max.
Yes, but we're going to get into that as we...
Yeah, but you said VO2 like 6 times and only said VO2. So if someone doesn't quite follow, like they don't know what you're talking about.
But they would know because I add the word max. If it's a new concept to somebody, does it... I'm trying to understand.
Oh my God. All right, so I'll just change our website to everything to VO2 and remove the max if it's not a big deal. For SEO, for like everything you could think of. Oh my God, you're just arguing for the sake of arguing.
I'm not arguing. You are. You stopped the podcast for VO2. Welcome to MD Longevity Lab, where we're playing the long game. This is a podcast where science meets real life with expert insights, practical tips, and real-world tools to not only live longer, but live better. Our aim is to radically change the way medicine is practiced and enable individuals to age gracefully, maintaining healthspan and vitality well into their later years. We're your hosts, Dr. Nisha and Dr. Vikas Patel, physicians, partners in life, and parents balancing work, wellness, and everything in between. Let's dive in. Welcome to the MD Longevity Podcast. Thank you for joining us today. Nisha just told me LFG. I don't even know what that means.
Well, we can't even say it because Apple, we put not explicit.
Let's
go.
Okay.
We're doing it.
Bam.
Yeah.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Great.
All right. So Vikas, we're going to get right into it. So if there was only one test that you could do on your patients to predict the health span and longevity of your patients, and it could be any blood test, CT scan, anything, what would it be?
VO2 max, by far and away, that is the one test that I would want to know, because there's literally no other test that is more predictive of mortality rates and functional outcome. It's the difference between reducing your risk of dying by 400%. Like, that's how impactful VO2 max can be.
That's crazy. So let's just break that down. So someone who has a high VO2 max is 400% less likely to die than someone who has a low
VO2 max. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we can get into some of the statistics as we move through this, but that's why that's my test of choice. VO2 max requires all of the systems of your body to be running at peak efficiency. So if any one system is not efficient, then you can't have a high VO2 max. So it's integrating all of the systems of your body into peak performance to be able to have that elevated number. Central nervous system, your musculature, your cardiovascular system, your lungs, your filtration system for your kidneys and your liver, your immune system, because that's what does the repairing every time that you exercise. Your immune system is what's actually repairing your tendons and your ligaments and your bones and your muscles. Everything has to work in coordination and has to be efficient in order for your VO2 max to be high. So that's why I can claim that if you have a high VO2 max, I can make a reasonable prediction that you're going to live this amount of time and you're going to be functional for that period of time. It's just because everything has to work correctly in order for you to have that very high VO2 max.
Wow. Just in lay terms, what is VO2 max?
VO2 max, the true definition is it's the milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute that your body is capable of consuming at max effort. So it's the maximum amount of oxygen that your body can use in a minute. And we measure this through different proxies. The gold standard of measuring it is where you're actually wearing a mask and there's a machine that's literally measuring the amount of oxygen that you're consuming, the amount of CO2 that you're blowing out.
And you're on a treadmill.
Exactly. You're exerting yourself through exercise on a erg machine or a bicycle or on a treadmill. Exactly.
Got it. We can kind of say it's like the size of our body's engine.
Yeah, I think it's easy to conceptualize a car engine. And we all kind of inherently understand the difference between a big V8 car that has 500 horsepower and a four-cylinder 100 horsepower engine. While both of them might be able to go 70 miles an hour, the big V8 is not taxed at all. So if it has to speed up to 90 to pass someone on the highway, it's a breeze for it to do. Its max top speed might be 170 miles an hour, while that four-cylinder car with the 100 horsepower, it'll take forever to get up to 90, and 90 might be the fastest it can ever go. So in our own body, it's the same thing. It boils down to reserve capacity. And the more reserve we have, the healthier we are.
We're in our 40s, and I think a common thing that we have noticed is we're tired, right? And there's a decline that starts after the age of 30, and every few years that goes by, that speeds up. What's the VO2 max that's required for all of us to just be able to walk at 3 miles an hour?
Yeah, so that's just a regular VO2, right? Not a max. So that is walking at 3 miles an hour is just a comfortable walking pace. You would probably need a VO2 of somewhere around 18 to be able to do that.
Got it. So let's say I'm in peak physical condition and I have a VO2 max of 50. I'm using less than half of my body's engine capacity to walk, right? So I'm not taxed. Whereas if my VO2 max is 25 and I'm 40 years old, walking a mile or two, I'm exhausted. And I think that's a common complaint that we get from patients in their 40s is, I'm exhausted. I don't have the energy that I used to have. And addressing your VO2 max, first of all, getting a baseline, but then also increasing that number is one of the best ways that all of us can improve our energy level.
I think this is like the case of the dwindles, right? So you start to feel weaker, right? You're more fatigued, you're tired, you don't have the energy, so you don't do as much. And because you're not doing as much, you feel even worse as time goes on. And it's just this slow death spiral that occurs. When you start putting in the intervention that you're going to start being more active, and we can talk a little bit about how you and I have increased our VO2 max. Obviously don't feel good when you first start doing it, but then you start completely reversing that death spiral and you have more energy. You feel like there's more stuff that you can do and you're getting the net gain and reversing this decline that you've been having.
So can you quantify what a normal decline is with age and VO2 max and what that looks like?
Right. So about an 8 to 10% decline in VO2 max per decade of life. So we talked about what walking is, right? That's 18 VO2 max, VO2. In order to run a mile in 10 minutes, so that's running at a 6 mile an hour pace, you have to have a VO2 probably of somewhere around 40 or so. Somebody who's got a VO2 of around 60 can run that same mile in 6 minutes. So if you were a college athlete and you were able to run at a 6-minute mile and you stop training at the age of 25, that decline every decade is going to be somewhere around 8 to 10%. So even that athlete who was in the best shape of their life when they were young, by the time they're 75, their VO2 max is now around 30. And so if you weren't in that kind of shape when you were 25, and let's say your VO2 max was 40, which is a pretty reasonable VO2 max, you can pretty much do everything that you want. Your VO2 max when you're 75 now is only going to be somewhere around 22. So now you're hovering in that area. If you get sick, you're going to end up in the hospital because your body has to divert so much energy to fighting off the infection that you can't walk to the bathroom anymore.
We're in the sandwich generation. We're raising kids and we also have parents that are getting older. And I think many of our listeners are in that same boat. And we've seen our parents, friends' parents, people in their 70s. There's a wide range. We've seen people on one end of the spectrum that they're skiing, they're on the slopes, you're on the lift with them, and you're like, man, they are 80 and they are cruising. That's how I want to be. And then you see people at the grocery store, Jewel, and they're rascals. And we've even seen nursing home patients in their 60s that are very deconditioned. It's a wide range. And just that decline, that we think about it 1% a year, but all of us have the ability to stop that, right? So there are people in their 70s with a VO2 max about the same as when they were in their 40s. And it's because they never stopped training.
Absolutely. So Nisha made this really cool calculator that we use with our patients on the difference between people who are not doing anything to train their VO2 versus people who are continuing to exercise. And the data shows that the people who are continuing to train, their decline in VO2 max is only about 0.5% a decade. And what a stark contrast, right? Like 0.5% versus an 8 to 10% decline per decade for the people who are not doing anything. And so you can see how those people who always remain active, why they're still active at 80 and lugging their gear to the ski mountain and skiing all day. It's because they probably never stopped being active and they're doing something in their off time to train, while the people who we were just in the airport recently and
oh my gosh.
we saw.
Don't even get me started. This lady was on a suitcase that was motorized and she was fully capable of walking. She was not handicapped and she was sitting on the suitcase in order to move to the next spot. And then she would stand up when she took the escalator.
That's great for kids, right?
It's fine for kids, but our ancestors would be rolling over in their graves if they saw that.
Yeah.
Right? Like we've become that lazy. That's where we're at. When we're at the airport, we're making our kids walk. So we do not take the escalators.
And we don't take the moving walkways because we know we're on a flight for a couple hours.
Yeah.
And so we try to get in our steps. And then we see people who clearly don't have a disability that are choosing to buy luggage that transports them.
Anyway, we digress. So back to VO2 max. I'm in my 40s, and whatever my VO2 max is, we have this calculator that can predict the decline. There is a number which is kind of at that threshold for independence.
So for men, it's about 18. For women, it's about 16 or 17.
So below that level, you are really not in a position to live independently. You're not able to go upstairs. You might be able to dress yourself, but you're not able to complete the activities of daily living. Am I right?
Yeah. So if you can't walk for 15 minutes at 3 miles an hour, then your VO2 max is low enough that if you get a simple urinary tract infection, I'm an ER doctor so frequently, a loved one, typically a child of an elderly patient, brings in their mom or dad saying, yesterday, mom was fine. And today said they didn't feel good and she could not get to the bathroom. Like I had to help carry her weight to get to the bathroom because she couldn't walk to the bathroom. Automatically, I know that her VO2 max at best is 16, 17 at best case scenario, because the simple act of having to fight off a urinary tract infection, which for most of us through the middle part of our life is just an inconvenience, right? It stinks to feel like you have burning when you pee or you got to pee more frequently, but it's not impacting whether you can actually do something or not. But at the end of our life, when our VO2 is declined enough, it's enough to put you in the hospital because now you can't walk.
Wow. None of us think it's coming, right? We're in our 40s and we see patients in the marginal decade of their life that really live poorly. And we think that will never happen to us. I'm not going to be that way. But I think this test, VO2 max, can really predict whether you're at risk for ending up that way. And if you have that knowledge now in your 30s, 40s, 50s, or even 60s, you have the power to change your trajectory.
Yeah, I had mentioned, Anisha, I had read a case study on a gentleman who wasn't an athlete, just regular person, not particularly physically active. He happened to go to a garage sale and buy a rowing machine. And he had a neighbor who was an exercise physiologist. The exercise physiologist kind of said, hey, you know what? Let me just test your VO2 max for the heck of it. And as you start using this thing.
How old was he when?
So he was 69 and his VO2 max was somewhere around like 29 or so at that
when
age. When he started. So this gentleman ended up living quite a long time. And his friend, his neighbor, kept retesting his VO2 max every year. So his VO2 max between the ages of 69 and 90 went up from 29 up to 50.
that's higher than mine currently. That's impressive.
But what that goes to show you is that that's an incremental change that happened year over year because he fell in love with exercise and continued doing it. It's not something that there's no need to change your VO2 max by 20 points in a year. What matters is that you're changing it by 1 or 2 points a year. And if you keep at it, that's a sustainable growth and you'll keep doing it. I think for people who are untrained and are not used to this, they go out and exercise really hard and they hate life because it hurts and they're wiped out and then they're done with this. And that's not what we want for our patients. We want to find a way to make this sustainable for them, how to make that change over 10 years, 15 years so that it's sustainable and that they're getting better with time. But a 9-year-old with a VO2 max of 50 is better than most 20-year-olds. So that's just kind of an insane little anecdote.
I think the other important thing in talking about VO2 max is the impact that it has on surgical recovery, illness, correct?
We have a lot of patients who develop orthopedic problems and are dealing with chronic knee pain or shoulder pain or something that they know that they're going to be down the path of needing surgery. And the less you do because you're limited by that orthopedic problem, the lower your VO2 max becomes. You're not getting that back once it goes so low. I think getting those procedures done earlier when you still have time to benefit from the repair, you're minimizing your recovery time, as you said, because if your VO2 max is 45 and you're down for a couple of days for the surgery where you're more or less immobile and everything gets worse when you're immobile, you lose muscle mass at an extremely high rate. Your metabolism goes down because you're not eating, you're just recovering. Your VO2 declines. It has to. And so if you're starting off with a good VO2 before pre-surgery, you're likely to recover quicker and get back to normal life much quicker.
And wound healing, we don't want wound infections. We want everything to start moving again, swelling to go down, inflammatory markers down. So all those processes are a function of VO2 max. You have a lot of patients that are going into surgery like the surgery is going to fix me and fix my problem. The surgery is an intervention, but it's not a substitute for our own movement. There should be an expectation that we're moving before surgery as best as we can, and we're moving after surgery, because it's ridiculous to think that a surgery alone is going to fix something better than what you had before it was even injured.
At some point, we can talk about back pain and back surgeries, but I think that's like the big misconception, especially with back pain, that I've got this disc problem, I'm going to have this surgery, and then I'm going to be pain-free and go back to playing golf 3 days a week like I did a decade ago. No, you're not, because you've declined for a decade and the back surgery will certainly improve the pain, but there are some limitations that come with that surgical repair. So I think you're right.
How often should we be getting this? I know we do this test at the lab on our patients, but for our listeners, how often should we be doing this test?
And I honestly, I think like once a year, people need to have this because it's like stepping on a scale, right? Like we don't even think twice about how often we might step on a scale. And that's one data point that isn't particularly useful from a general health perspective. It does give you some actionable information, but it doesn't tell you how much lean muscle you have. It doesn't tell you what your bone density is. It doesn't tell you whether the extra fat on our body is the dangerous fat that's inside of our gut, right? But we check it frequently. VO2 is not easy to check frequently. So it's not something that you would want to be doing once a week, but you should know what it is year over year so that you can see, are you declining? Are you maintaining? Are you actually increasing because you instituted this program for yourself? And I think there's like this mental benefit of knowing that, oh, I'm doing okay with this.
Yeah. We tested ourselves when we first opened up the lab, and then testing later and seeing, oh my gosh, we're a year older, but our VO2 max went up instead of that normal 1% decline if you're not training per year. So it's very validating that it is working because let's face it, we're old. It takes a lot longer for us to see change right? And the way our clothes are fitting, sometimes energy level. There's a lot of competing factors, stress, sleep, other things. So I think just getting that metric, getting that number and seeing it improve. I think in a lot of our patients, when they jump a whole class, they've gone from like the bottom 25th percentile to above average now. That's in 1 year. And these are people who have never trained. It's super motivating to see those improvements. So people shouldn't be afraid. I think that
They shouldn't be afraid.
are afraid to get a baseline and
I
they
think
don't want to know.
people, I mean, I think this is common. It's just part of the human condition, right? Like, I don't want to know. I don't want to test because if I test, then you're going to tell me something bad and then I got to do something about it. And I get that mentality, but maybe it's helpful to know that scientists have studied this on people who have no training background, who are older, patients that are over the age of 65, and put them through a 10 or 12-week training regimen where they have them do zone 2 cardio and then some interval training. And in that 10 to 12 week period, they can increase their VO2 max by 10%. That's a huge increase in just under 3 months of training. And so that should give everybody out there some inspiration that these are people in their late 60s and beyond. That was the inclusion criteria for the study, and that you can't be an athlete. You can't be somebody who's still running marathons or half marathons. These are just regular senior citizens, and they're able to increase their VO2 max by % in just that 10, 12-week period. So this is something that everybody can do.
I love that. And I hate to be all doom and gloom, but being on the physician side of things where we're taking care of patients, end of life, nursing home care, I mean, it is awful. It is horrible. If we had a choice in how we spend the last few years of our life, would we ever choose to live that way? Nor would we wish that on anyone we didn't like.
It's giving up independence.
Yeah,
right?
It's horrible. And so if we have this metric that can predict for a 60-year-old in 20 years, will I still be independent? If I'm 40 and I'm doing this test, in 40 years, am I going to be independent? That would be impactful. I think more impactful than, doing a blood test and saying everything's normal. We'll see you next year. Or, hey, your weight's up. You need to lose 5 pounds. Having a tangible metric and having that mortality risk, like you increasing your VO2 max by 2, just decrease your mortality risk by X amount. So
Correct.
I think those numbers are super important for patients to hear.
We touched on this a minute at the beginning about the mortality benefit of VO2. So why don't you explain a little bit about what some of those numbers are that we care about from a mortality standpoint, from the common diseases that everyone has heard of?
We're trained in the realm of, we talk to our patients about smoking, heart disease, diabetes, end-stage renal disease. And I think when you look at the data of VO2 max, the numbers are staggering. While we tell our patients, yes, stop smoking. Smoking is not good for you. We never have the conversation with patients about what the stats are. So if you want to go through the numbers.
Yeah. So this is lifestyle modification, right? So some of these things like smoking, yes, that can be a lifestyle modification, but whether you have a diagnosis of cardiovascular disease or hypertension, it's not necessarily a lifestyle thing. That's a disease that you now have. And we're used to talking about that with our patients, but patients should know, well, what does that mean from a mortality standpoint? And then now this new concept of VO2 max. Well, what does that mean from a mortality standpoint?
Can you clarify mortality?
Yeah. So when I'm talking about mortality, I'm literally talking about your chance of dying in any year of your life if you have this thing. So if you are a smoker versus somebody who does not smoke, what is your chance of dying in any year of your life? And this is all-cause mortality. So whether the smoker dies of emphysema, which is what happens from damage to the lungs, or whether they die from cardiovascular disease as a complication of the smoking, or they die of lung cancer, it's all-cause mortality if you're a smoker versus a non-smoker.
So what's that number for smokers?
So that it's 40%. So a non-smoker in any year of their life has a 40% reduced likelihood of dying compared to a smoker.
So we should stop smoking.
Stop smoking.
Okay.
Hypertension is about a 20% difference in mortality rate. Somebody who has blood pressure versus somebody who does not have high blood pressure. Diabetes, initial numbers that I used to see were around 40% difference in mortality. The newer numbers that I've been seeing are somewhere between 70 and 80% increased risk of mortality. That just goes to show there's a bunch of other disease processes that are connected to diabetes that diabetes increases the risk of. So it increases your risk of stroke, heart attacks, kidney failure, peripheral arterial disease requiring amputations. It's just such a bad global disease that it carries this pretty high mortality risk with it. End stage renal disease. So if you
For people on dialysis.
So your kidneys are bad enough that they've failed and you're on dialysis. So they have almost a 280% higher risk of dying than somebody who does not have any sort of kidney disease.
VO2 max. What's that number?
Yeah. So scientists have looked at this data, and in order to make it easier to digest, they broke down VO2 max into essentially 5 categories. But the first 3 categories are quartiles. So it'll be 0 to 25. They consider low. Percentiles in the population. And then the 26th to 50th percentile is they consider below average. 51 to 75 is above average. And then 76 to 97.5 is what they consider high. And then that top 2.5%, they consider elite VO2 max. Mm-hmm. So if we look at that bottom quartile, the bottom 25th percentile versus the elite, the top 2.5 percentile, that's a 400% mortality difference. So that's just huge, right? There's nothing on the previous list that we talked about. Hypertension, even kidney failure only causes about a 200%
But
increase.
That's the crazy part. One of the things that we really should be asking, what is your VO2 max? Just to get an idea of where this patient is at. Because if people knew this information, they'd be doing something with it. And I think it's a real disservice that we're not using this currently. I'm hopeful that in another 10 years in primary care, this is just going to be the standard that every doctor wants to see a VO2 max on a patient. This is better yet, even taught in our medical schools from the get-go. But for now, I think it's just kind of up to us, and it's up to patients who are listening, reading.
Yeah, I'm not as optimistic. I don't think 10 years it'll be ubiquitous because our system is slow to change. But I think the more of us that are advocating for this type of testing and the more patients that are demanding it, the needle starts to move. Because there's nothing, I can't prescribe any drug that would be more impactful for somebody's health in the long run than getting their VO2 to go up a category from whatever category they're in. If you're in the elite class, great, like you're killing it. But that's not the average person, right? That's the top 2.5% of the population. So everyone else needs some work. And even the person who's in the high category, which is excellent health, even for them to go from the high to the elite category, there's still a 30% reduction in mortality.
There's no ceiling, meaning the benefit doesn't run out.
There's a whole thing with
for the most
total
part.
body inflammation when you're at these insane levels of endurance.
But for the rest of us,
for the rest of us,
99.9% of us.
Correct. There's no ceiling for the rest of us.
So are we testing young people, athletes, middle-aged people? Who are we testing?
I would say it's most important probably for people who are adults, just because of the nature of life. When you're younger, you're always kind of moving. Your VO2 is decent at that time. But as we get older, we become more sedentary. And this is when our VO2 starts to drop and becomes more of a problem. So VO2 max is a thing that we check on all of our patients, but this is not something done by most primary care doctors.
So this data has been out for 30 years, and we get a lot of patients that ask us, well, why aren't we doing this on our patient? It's not a pill that you can package up and have covered by insurance. That is where our traditional medicine model goes. So VO2 max is something that patients really need to seek out.
You have to seek it out. You're right. The data's been out there for a while, but I don't think the data was in the right circles. So it was being used for performance athletes, and that's not what we're using it for. It just turns out that those people who have insanely high VO2 maxes, they live a long time and they end up being healthy for most of their life. And it took a while for that to filter down to the medical community that, oh, wait, this is something that's applicable to everyone. This is not just something applicable to somebody who's trying to be a triathlete. This is applicable for Jane Doe and John Doe that just live a completely quote unquote normal life. And so I agree, our medical model doesn't fit this because this is not something that we can say, hey, take this pill and I'll see you in 6 months. Let's shift gears a little bit here and get into how to test and then training for VO2 max looks like. So we'd alluded to the testing earlier. The gold standard of testing is that you're getting it done in a lab where you're wearing a mask. That mask makes a nice seal on your face and it's measuring all of the oxygen that you're breathing in and how much CO2 you're breathing out. With those numbers, we can calculate what your metabolic burn is and hence your VO2 max.
And that test on a treadmill takes about 15 minutes, would you say?
It depends on the protocol, but a good protocol at minimum should be taking somewhere in that ballpark. If your protocol that you're doing is only taking 7 minutes, then it's not a good protocol. So there are some specifics on what makes a good VO2 max protocol, but yes.
For patients that can't run or they have orthopedic injuries, is there a walking protocol?
Absolutely. So this can be done walking. It can be done on a bicycle. So for instance, if you're doing it walking, we'll max you out at a comfortable walking pace, 3.5 miles an hour. And then you're increasing the incline. And once the incline gets up to 15%, you're going to be uncomfortable and you're sweating, even though you're not walking any faster. So yes, I can do this walking. If it's done on a bicycle, whatever is a comfortable RPM for you, for most people, it's somewhere between 80 and 90 revolutions a minute. Then you're increasing the resistance. And you have to be maintaining that same comfortable pedaling speed. And slowly we're increasing the resistance until you can't do any more increase in resistance.
You're not like a personal trainer where you're yelling at someone like, keep going. Like,
I mean, only when
just
you do
me,
it. Only when
just
you do
me.
it.
But I want you to do that because my goal is to just be better than you, which I think there's a handful of things I'm better at you than.
You're better at life.
No. Pushing out children. I think making children, I'm better at you.
I'm not so good.
No.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. So like you don't have to go to max effort. The algorithms that the computer software uses allows you to do a sub-max effort and get a pretty reasonable approximation. Obviously, the further you go, the less guesswork that the computer has to do and the more accurate your data is. But to have a pretty good ballpark, even if you get to 85% of your max, 85 to 90%, you're going to get really accurate numbers. The people who want the best of the best, they go all the way out to their max effort. But we're able to tell at a sub-max effort whether the data collection is good enough. And with my own patients in our clinic, the second that I get to that point where the data collection has given us enough information, I let the patient know, okay, we got enough data. At this point, all I need to know when you finish is, was it a full max effort or was it a sub-max effort? Could you have gone another minute and another speed increase or resistance increase? And so that's how I'm coaching the patients. I'm not typically yelling at them.
All right. Another thing to note. So most of us have an Apple Watch. It's not as accurate. Obviously, the gold standard is doing it in the lab. A watch does an estimate. At least on your watch, you can follow the trends.
The watches, the wearables, probably Garmin's are a little better than Apple Watches, but you have to understand that all of the wearables are just using a formula to calculate your max heart rate, and that may not actually be your max heart rate. So if that formula doesn't put out the right number for your max heart rate, then the numbers are just going to be off. I thought for the longest time that I was really not in good shape because before I'd ever gotten my VO2 max tested, my Apple Watch always said my VO2 max was in the mid 30s. And I'm like, I'm running
I think that's the only time I was better than you is when we got, I was like, yeah, I'm better than you.
And when I finally got my VO2 max actually tested, my VO2 max in the lab was about 20 points higher than what my Apple Watch always told me. And so that's when I realized, okay, like this thing is good for the trend. So if it's moving downwards over the span of a few months, then that's actionable in the sense that, okay, I've been more sedentary and I'm not exercising very much. And yes, my VO2 max has gone down or vice versa, but the absolute numbers, they're not super accurate. So we've both been doing training ever since we learned about this.
How would you coach a patient? Let's say John Smith comes to your office and hasn't worked. He's 45. He's got a dad bod and a beer belly.
Which we're in right now.
How would you coach him? So he's scared to get tested. He gets tested. He's not in the bottom quartile, but he's below average.
Below average quartile.
Yeah. How would you coach
pretty
him?
Common. So number one is figuring out, like, do they have an aversion to any particular exercise, right? If they hate running, but they have a Peloton at home that just sits in the corner, but they've used it and they do actually enjoy it, I would say you're going to do your exercise on the bike then. If you absolutely can't stand running, then, but you can tolerate the bike, then whatever modality you can tolerate is the one that is going to work for you. I will say that when you can't tolerate something like running, you're probably doing it wrong. And I know that because you coached me when I was doing the running wrong, which we'll get to.
Vikas used to run like Phoebe from Friends before I coached.
That's not what I look like. I would just pick a distance. In the beginning, it might have been a mile, then it might have been 3 miles or 4 miles. I would just pick a distance and run it as fast as I could because I hated the boredom in my mind. I hated...
You would just want to get it over
with. The physical pain of it. It was more the mental pain of it than anything. And then I would come home and you would be like, it looks like you're having a heart attack. And I'd be like, I feel like I'm having a heart attack. She's run several marathons and a bunch of half marathons. And so she's like, you're doing this all wrong. You have to go slow. Like, you have to actually distract your mind with nature, distract your mind with a podcast or a book or the right playlist. But you shouldn't be in physical pain when you're running. You should be running slow enough that you can think clearly, you can enjoy being outside. Then you can work on speed later. But in the beginning, it's just about completing a certain amount of time. And that if you're untrained like John Smith, the goal initially is just being out there for a little while. Once John Smith can be out there for 30 minutes, 40 minutes of continuous running, then it makes sense to start doing some intervals. And that's where the VO2 max will really start to more aggressively increase. But just going from sit on the couch to I can run continuously for 30 minutes, that alone will increase your VO2 max. But once you get to the point where I can run for 30 minutes, 40 minutes and feel like I'm fine, then it makes sense to start throwing in these intervals because you're conditioning the top end of your cardiovascular and cardiorespiratory system then.
Let's say we have a patient in their 70s. Their friends are passing away or moving to nursing homes and they're worried and they get tested and their VO2 max is pretty low. It's in their 20s. Even something like telling them to go for a 20-minute walk once or twice a day, is that something that can improve their VO2 max?
Yeah, so walking alone, if you're not doing it and you have not been doing it, it will increase your VO2 max. You and I do this. We'll ruck. We'll wear a backpack with a little bit of weight in it. And so for people who have orthopedic issues and they want to be outside and they're fine walking, but they can't run, then I'll say, okay, great. Let's get to a point where you can walk 30 minutes. If you can walk 30 minutes at a decent clip, then you're going to start wearing a backpack and put 10 pounds in it. And if you can do that for 30 minutes, then you're going to put 15 pounds or 20 pounds and slowly work up. So there's basically no major resistance problems. You're not going to increase arthritis or anything like that because it's not the impact of running. And so that's an excellent way. If you're going to do it on a treadmill, then it's increasing incline because you can go from walking on flat level surface to increasing the incline to 10 and leave it there for a couple minutes and then go back down. And that can be the interval workout. So what I tell patients is once you can get up to doing 30 to 40 minutes of continuous low level cardio where it's not taxing, this should not be a max effort. This should be, I'm doing it at a low enough level that I can still talk to somebody while I'm doing it. Then you can start doing some intervals where you might take 2 minutes and do at a faster pace. And then recover after that 2 minutes, where you're going to take 2 to 4 minutes to recover, kind of catch your breath, and then repeat that again for 2 minutes.
This is perceived exertion. So my all out might be 9 miles an hour, right? Which I think I'm superhuman. And then I'll run on a treadmill next to Vikas, and his all out might be 12. Even though I'm not running as fast, my VO2 max might match his just because of my perceived exertion, correct?
It probably has more to do with body weight, right? So perceived exertion is what eventually I tell patients that on that interval, I really want your perceived exertion to be somewhere around the 8 or a 9. And that means that you still got something left, but you're pretty tired. Right? 10 out of 10 is I've gone to complete max effort. If you really, really are interested in increasing your VO2 max, then you need to do your VO2 max intervals where you're getting to that 10 out of 10 by the end of your intervals. You don't need to do that to make improvement. If you can get to 8.5 out of 10, then you're still going to make a ton of improvement, because the goal is that we want you to do 4 to 6 intervals. And if you can finish 6 intervals of 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off, 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off, if you can finish 6 of those, you've achieved a new level of fitness. Now you're ready to do 3 minutes on, 3 minutes off, or 3 minutes on, 4 minutes off, whatever recovery it might take you to feel like, okay, I'm ready to go again. So the goal and what I do is 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off. And I do 6 of those repeats. And that's a workout that you at max would do once a week. Once you've achieved the VO2 max that you want, you can back off. You can do it once every other week, once every 3 weeks, because the maintenance is not nearly as burdensome as making the change.
I come from the background of marathon running, right? Where we're just running. And now doing that one VO2 max training a week or every other week, you're working smarter, not harder.
I would say 1 hour a week would be the bare minimum, where a half hour is you doing that steady state cardio, and the other half hour on a different day, 3 days later, is that VO2 max day. At bare minimum, I think everybody should be doing that if that's the only type of cardio exercise that they're doing. If you play a sport or something, you play pickleball or tennis, or you're in a basketball league, you're getting cardio in another form. But if you don't do any exercise, and I would say 1 hour minimum, the government says that 150 minutes a week of moderate exercise is what's necessary. And I agree with that. The HIIT workouts, which are interval training, basically allow you to get away with doing less exercise, but your level of exertion is not moderate. It's very high. And so you can do an interval training that only takes 30 minutes, but you get the benefit of perhaps 60 to 70 minutes of otherwise moderate activity.
After listening to this, if there was one takeaway, it would be improve your VO2 max.
If there's only one thing that you were going to change, improve your VO2 max.
Improving your VO2 max is the number one thing that we can do for our health.
Yeah, absolutely. Increase your VO2 max, because if you're doing that, so many other disease processes in your body start to reverse. Well, we can touch just briefly on strength training and VO2. We'll have another podcast dedicated to strength training, because it's a different gain that you're getting that is very different than VO2. There are people who have a lot of lean muscle mass that don't have particularly high VO2 because the training is very different. They almost always have at least average or above average VO2, but they don't typically, just through their strength training, fall into the high or the elite category. And so there's a different importance to having lean muscle mass, which we'll talk about. You can do exercise regimens that include strength training with low rest between sets that can increase your VO2 max. So if you really enjoy weightlifting and you don't want to give that up, and you say, hey, I only have 2 hours a week to exercise, I use that 2 hours a week in the gym lifting weights, then I'd say, well, you can keep doing that. I might modify your regimen by decreasing your rest periods and switching from one compound movement to another compound movement with very little rest in between so that your heart rate never drops. And then you're still getting that VO2 max training in there while you're doing weightlifting.
So people can pick whatever they want. It could be running, it could be walking, it could be rucking, it could be weight training, swimming, cycling, Peloton, whatever. So most important factor is to just pick something that you think you can stick to.
It's picking something that you enjoy and then breaking that out into a couple days a week of the slower, steady type of cardio. And then that one day a week where you're doing the more intense. If you can do that, then you're well on your way to not just maintaining your VO2 max, but increasing it over time.
And I think undoubtedly patients come back when their VO2 max is higher and they say, I've got my energy back. I have the energy to play with my kids or my grandkids.
The patient I saw today, his VO2 max went up from 40 to 47.2 in 1 year, right? So that's almost 20% gain that he's had. And I was like, oh, how are you feeling? And he's like, I feel great. Like I've got energy. He has 3 little kids and that's, I'm consuming other than a busy job. I think all of us, we have 3 kids and it was a little rough going for a while on our energy levels, but he feels like he can do anything that he wants to do. And that's not how he felt when we first started a year ago. It took a little bit of convincing that it's worth your time. And I promise you'll come back and tell me that this has changed.
I know. It sounds like a tough sell. You're telling someone who's already tired, all right, I know you're tired, but I need you to work a little harder. So it's a little bit of a buy-in, but I think the increased energy component, people can see a difference in as little as 4 to 6 weeks, right?
Absolutely. If you think about it from the standpoint of, I need to go do this thing for 30, sometimes that's the overwhelming part. And I tell patients, like, this is not the way I want you to think about it. That might be the goal eventually, but right now the goal is put on your shoes and go outside for 5 minutes. We can mentally stomach that. And once you can do 5 minutes, you'll probably stay out there for 10 or 15 minutes. But if you only do 5 minutes, that's it. You finish at 5 minutes and the next time you go out for 6 or 7 minutes. It's gradually building up to those longer durations. And much the way that you changed my framework for running, now I feel like I enjoy running. The days that I'm just going for a slow, long run are enjoyable. Like I know I mentally feel better and physically feel better afterwards. When I was running incorrectly, it was just an exercise in pain all around. And that.
How soon is this going to be over?
Yeah, totally. It was just, I have to do this. I don't know if this is ever going to feel any better. And it never did because I was only running to get it done as quick as possible. And so now I'm running to smell the roses and look at nature and I'm free to let my mind roam. But you had told me before that I never really understood that you're like, no, this actually mentally it de-stresses me.
Yeah, like, running. I mean, I start my run and I am thinking about 8,000 different things. I also probably have undiagnosed ADHD, but that's for another episode. You can work through so many problems, whatever you're mad about, whatever you're upset about or worried about, thinking about. At the end of your run, you've just cleared your head and you're ready to face whatever's on your plate. So I enjoy running. I'm super slow. I think there's many people who could probably walk faster than I run, but I'm still moving.
Obviously, if you guys have questions about VO2, please feel free to contact us. We'd be happy to answer any questions about VO2 max and what it means for your health. Otherwise, we will see you next time. Thank you for playing the long game with MD Longevity Lab. You can visit us at www.mdlongevitylab.com to learn more about how we can support you on your journey. Stay connected with us on social media at MD Longevity Lab for tips, updates, and behind-the-scenes insights. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love it if you subscribed, left us a rating, or shared it with someone you know who's also playing the long game. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.